Hello everybody, today what we are looking at is calculating the gradient of a straight line graph. So a lot of the graphs that we've been looking at so far has all been linear, okay, so they are straight line graphs. What we're going to be focusing on today is something called the gradient. Now what the word gradient means is it's a measure of slope, so how steep our line is. So if we think about our straight line, okay, if I was to draw over here my set of axes, so I've got my x-axis and my y-axis. If I were to have a straight line, it's to see if it's going to be this steepness, if it's going to be even steeper, all right, or if it's going to be less steep. So the slope or the steepness of our line, okay, that's what we call gradient. We can assign a number to that. We can assign a value. So we know our equation, okay, for a straight line is y equals mx plus c. So we might have noticed that we've got our y on the left side, we've got a number, we're going to call that m in front of our x, and then plus or minus another number. So that value, m, is what we are calling the gradient, okay? And I know this is new, but bear with me for now. So the gradient is going to be referred to as m. So whenever you're asked to calculate m or the gradient, that's what we are doing today. So we're looking at the increase in y as x increases by 1. Okay, so what's happening as our x value increases by 1, how much is our y value increasing or decreasing? So if I have my set of axes in blue, and my line is pointing in this direction, okay, so it's pointing in the positive direction if we follow that line straight up. All right, we say that this line over here has a positive gradient. So the value of m is going to be a positive value, okay? If our line is pointing the opposite direction, so if we were to draw that line straight and our line points towards the negative side, okay, because remember on this side of our axis is all negative, we call that a negative gradient. So gradient means slope. So this direction is a positive slope or a positive gradient. This direction is our negative gradient. If our gradient is horizontal, okay, so it's a value that cuts through just the y-axis, we say that that has a gradient of 0. Okay, so here it has a 0 gradient for that one there. Okay, but if our line is vertical, where it just cuts the x-axis, we say that gradient is undefined. Okay, so we're going to say undefined gradient. So you need to know the difference between these 4 different types of gradients that we can have. So positive, any of our lines pointing this way. Negative is like a mirror of that, so our lines are now pointing this way. 0 is where we have a horizontal line. Undefined is where we have a vertical line. Now, we've said that we can calculate this gradient, but how do we do it? So that's what we're going to look at now. So we have a special rule or a way that we work it out, and that is called rise over run. So rise is always looking at how far up or down we are going, okay? And run is how left or right we are going, okay? So when you think about rise, I want you to think about how we're going up or down. When we look at run, I want you to think about how we're going left or right, okay? In other words, our rise is our change in y values, okay, because our y-axis is vertical, and our run is our change in our x values, so our horizontal. So if we think about this graph here, I can see that this graph passes through 0, 0, and it also passes through the point 2, 3. So I've been given 2 points on my graph. I've been given 0, 0, and I've been given 2, 3. So what I need to do is if I look at these 2 points, I need to look at what the change is in my y values and what the change is in my x values. So gradient we said is m, so I'm going to say m equals, instead of writing the whole word gradient, m equals my change in my y values. So how do I get from my first y value to to the second y value that I've been given, okay, in that point that we've identified. So what is the difference between 0 and 3? Now the difference between 0 and 3 is 3. So I'm going to say m is 3 over, okay, because I've got a line there, over my run, so my change in x. So now I'm going to see those same 2 points, and it's important you choose the same 2 points. What is the difference between the x values? Now we know that this is an x value of 0, and this is an x value of 2. So the difference between 0 and 2 is 2 points. Okay, so I'm going to write my run underneath. So my gradient for my first line is 3 over 2. Now we know if we convert 3 over 2 into a number that's a decimal, 3 divided by 2 is the same as me saying 1.5. So that means when we write our equation, the number that's going to go in front of the x is going to be, in this case, 1.5. That is our value for our gradient. Alrighty, let's try another one here. So this one, what is my rise? So I am rising. Let's go m equals, if I've got my 2 points, I've got this point here, which we can say is 0, 4. And I've got this point here, which we can say is 4, 0, because remember you always write your x value first and then your y value. My gradient is going to be the difference in my rises. So let's look at my 2 y values. I've got a y value of 0 and a y value of 4. So it's going to be 4 over, now my run. My run, I'm going from my x value, which is 0, to my y value, which is 4. So to go from 0 to 4 is 4. Now 4 divided by 4 we know is 1. But what we have to do is we have to see if it's positive or negative. So remember, anything that's pointing in this direction is positive, which this one here, it's pointing in that direction, so we know that this number is going to be positive. But this one here, our slope is pointing the opposite direction. So we need to identify that on here. Which direction is this pointing? It's pointing towards the negative side if that line was to continue up, okay, which means it's going to be a negative gradient. So what I need to do to that number is I need to add a -1 in front of it. That means my gradient is -1. All right, last one. This one over here. So let's have a look. My m value is going to equal something, my gradient. I identify my 2 points. So I've got 1 point here, which is my y-intercept, so 0, 6. And this point here, which is my x-intercept, which is 3, 0. Okay, so I need to see between those 2 points, what is my rise? So if my first point is at a y value of 0 and my second point is at a y value of 6, the difference between 6 and 0 is 6. So it's going to be 6 over my run. Now my run is my x values. So between my x value of 0 and my x value of 3, difference between 0 and 3 is 3. 6 divided by 3 we know is 2. But now we need to see which direction our graph is pointing. So if we look at this, when it's in this direction, all right, these numbers are pointing towards, on our x values are going to be negative. That's how we can identify that it's going to be a negative gradient. So in front of that 2, I need to make sure that I put a negative. So my gradient in this case is going to be -2. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. But just as a summary, you need to be able to identify whether my gradient is positive. So positive gradients always go this way, or negative, which means my line is going to be drawn this way, to identify whether you're going to have a positive or negative sign in front of your answer. And then the formula that we use. So gradient is rise over run, where rise is looking at our 2 points. How do we get from our first point to our second point? Okay, how many values do we have to move up or down? And our run, if we're looking at our 2 points, how many values do I have to take to go from one point to make it to the exact same x, to make the x value on the other point? What's the distance I have to go for that one? Okay, so you do the rise divided by the run Please give this video a thumbs up and have a nice day. Bye.